The fierce wind moaned among the cliffs of rugged Labrador. The wild waves dashed with thunderous sound against the rock-bound shore. The snow that dimmed the noonday sun fell on the muffled form of one who, blessed with manhood's strength, defied the raging storm. Some 100 fathoms from the shore, upon a reef of rock, a bark had struck while spars and keel were shivered by the shock. The jagged point on which she lay had pierced from keel to deck, and pale with fear the trembling crew were clinging to the wreck. Ere and anon the crested waves upon her rushed amain, as if they in their mad career could wrench her planks in twain. A moment Jackman gazed upon this scene of dreadful woe, then flung his boots and coat apace upon the drifting snow. My apologies. I'm new at this. So, today's Terra Nova Tuesday will be discussing the story of Captain William Jackman. This is something of a personal hero of mine. I was born in the hospital that was named for him in Labrador City. That hospital has since closed, and I believe it's necessary to maintain a degree of pride in our heritage as Newfoundlanders to recall the accomplishments of a hero, essentially. Excuse me. Now, this piece that I'm going to read is from chibukto.org. I may be mispronouncing that. It may be Chibukto. One of the things that is somewhat disappointing is that in hunting for resources about Captain William Jackman, it was very difficult for me to find one that was based in Newfoundland. This piece is from, excuse me, a book called The Treasury of Newfoundland Stories, which was published, surprisingly, by Maple Leaf Mills Limited, probably the same Maple Leaf company that makes Maple Leaf Bologna, and it was published in 1961. And just to bring it back onto screen so you guys can read along if you choose. The name of Captain William Jackman is all but, I will say, unknown outside Newfoundland. Yet the story of his heroic selflessness and daring is one the whole world should applaud. Through some strange turn of fate, this gallant Newfoundlander has been all but forgotten even by his own countrymen, and no memorial records his valor. That story I will actually touch on later. In the little fishing town of Renews, which is actually misspelled here, it should be renew as in renewable. In Renews, on the southeast corner of Newfoundland, Jackman first saw the light of day. Together with his brother Captain Arthur Jackman, this hardy and vigorous fisherman became a successful sealing captain. And among the sturdy old sea dogs who, in the past 2 centuries, have driven armored prows far and wide among the treacherous ice floes, here also floes is misspelled, there was no finer type of skipper. However, Jackman's niche in his country's Hall of Fame was earned not by his work as a sealing captain, but as a Labrador fisherman. It was the autumn of 1867, which, for the record, is about the time Canada became a country, and did not include Newfoundland or Labrador at the time. In any case, it was the autumn of 1867. A fierce gale was raging, and Jackman's vessel, together with others of the fishing fleet, sought a temporary haven at Spotted Islands, or possibly Spotted Island. The exact correct terminology does differ, on the bleak coast of Labrador. While the storm raged, some seaman's instinct urged Jackman to mount the crest of the hill above the harbor and scan the torn waste of water to seaward. Now, they're being a little romantic with their language here in this story. I'll just put my cursor here for a marker. It may very well have been some instinct that drove him to have a look around. It may simply have been wanting to have a look at what was going on so that he was able to predict how long the weather would hold, or how long before the weather would break, depending on how you want to phrase that. In any case, as the story continues, his instinct was justified, for there, on the foaming reef some 400 yards from shore, rolled a stricken ship, her boats and canvas gone, and her crew clinging to the shrouds and shouting in wild despair. Other than Jackman, save for Jackman, no one knew of their plight. Now, this also has some disputation in some of the literature I've read. There are accounts that Jackman was accompanied by a dog, in some accounts, a Newfoundland dog, of course, if I recall correctly, named Champ, though, again, he doesn't appear in all the sources. And in this source, unlike others, Jackman is depicted as being alone. In some other sources that I have found, he was simply taking a constitutional on the beach and spotted the ship. What the actual fact is, we may never know. It's very difficult at this point, almost 150, actually about 155 years later, right now, as I'm reading this, to really know exactly what happened. It wasn't exactly the sort of thing that one would have time to chronicle accurately during the situation. Now, as the story says here, save for Jackman, no one knew of their plight. There was no other aid in sight, but Jackman did not hesitate or pause to count the odds against him. If I were to actually phrase that in a modern terming, I would say that Jackman felt the call that all good men should feel, and decided to act. Racing down the snowy, windswept hill to the shore, he quickly stripped, flung his clothes beneath a boulder, and plunged into the seething, bitterly cold surf. Now, to give you a little bit of context, I am going to show you where Spotted Island is. Oh, that's my mistake. There, okay. So, Spotted Island is near Newfoundland and Labrador. I thought there was a map on this page. I do apologize. Okay, so it's not this link that I needed. I'm sorry again. I'll do it on Google Maps. And close that. So this is Newfoundland Island here. This is Labrador. Newfoundland and Labrador, more accurately. And Spotted Island, or Spotted Islands, depending on how one wishes to use the term. Spotted Island is here. Now, personally, I'm unsure of what part of the coast this would have happened on. But if we zoom in a little more, we can see that there is what is probably a walking trail as opposed to a road. And you can see how very rocky this coastline is. So, quite likely, and I think there may be a lighthouse, or may have been a lighthouse at this space at one point. But you can see here, there is not exactly a lot of beach to be walking. There's a tiny beach here, and this looks like it's all very, very rocky. Castle Dermot is just the name of that rock. But my thinking is that it was probably some of these rocks that Captain Jackman, the hero of our story, as you will, was witness to what had happened here. Now, I do apologize for the slowness of my movements with the mouse and some of the noise, but to return to our story. Racing down the hill he stripped, most likely, and this is different depending on who is telling the story, but most likely he would have stripped at the most to his underwear. Quite likely he left undershirt and pants on. It was not uncommon for men to wear a heavy sweater or any number of other clothes in order to deal with the very cold weather that happens in this area. In fact, just to give you an idea, I have another little piece here that will give you an idea. Currently today is the 8th of November, and it is just about 10 o'clock in the morning. But this happened during October of 1867. The average temperature in October is 6 degrees in Labrador. That's the air temperature. The temperature of the water at that time was probably significantly lower, to the point that had Captain Jackman not been extremely physically active, he probably would have been suffering from hypothermia. And you will see later that this story does have something of a tragic outcome, at least for our hero. He was an excellent swimmer, and you will hear in some other sources that it was uncommon for people to be good swimmers at the time. I would dispute that just based on personal experience. Let me see. Okay. I was going to look at the Wikipedia entry, but I think this will probably be the better route to go. So, he's in the water, excellent swimmer, and his long, powerful strokes soon brought him beyond the shoreline Oh, goodness. That should be shoreline breakers. A breaker is a type of wave where, as it begins to rise up, the land underneath the water in many places in Newfoundland will drop sharply, not far from the water's edge, especially where you have rocky shore. So the breaker is where, and I can put my face on screen just to show you this. Oops, my apologies. So this is the wave, and this is essentially the way the land will go is, here's the water's edge, and then you will get a sudden drop. And what happens is the wave will come in, and it'll come fairly calmly. You have to realize you're actually talking about a volume of water that's moving like a wall, similar to the way the wind moves. And what happens is when that wall hits the rise in the land, and the water's edge still being here, what happens is you have a wave that goes from being this high to a wave that sharply rises. That's a breaker. And you get that roll, which surfers love. Just to bring this back. So these are what he has to break through. That area of the coastline is often quite difficult to swim through because there is a very large amount of force pushing up and back against you if you're swimming directly outwards. So the shoreline breakers where he could breathe more freely. Yes, the water is far less turbulent, so it's easier to have the time to take a breath. Now, again, this was in the middle of a storm, so it's not like it was that easy anyway, just to make sure you understand the context of this. Mounting the crest of each wave, he availed himself of every little advantage of wind and weather, and finally he reached the doomed schooner. Taking a man on his back, he swam back to shore. Now, this part of the story I've heard differently as well. In some cases, you will hear that this schooner had already taken on crew from another distressed ship. In some cases, it is women. It is a mixed crew. In other cases, it is all men. It depends on whether the initial vessel that's mentioned is a sailing ship, a fishing ship, or some merchant, etc., etc. But in any case, taking a man on his back, he swam back to shore, buffeted by mountainous seas and half-blinded in the salt smother of foam. I have swum in those waters. Not those exact waters, but the waters of the North Atlantic. It is extremely difficult to maintain, to keep your eyes open in that situation because of the salt. Once on shore, he ordered the rescued man to hurry across the island for help. Then he turned again to the self-imposed task which confronted him. When additional rescuers arrived, they found that the indomitable captain had, alone and unaided, already brought 11 persons safely to shore. Now, other versions of this that I've heard are that he swam out, took a rope from the boat, and swam back. And in some cases, there's a dog helping him. In other cases, he simply ferried a rope out and brought back. But in this story, and this is the most common version, he had 26 times did Captain Jackman swim out to the wrecked ship, and 26 men were thus saved by his daring heroism. His strength was ebbing, and he was on the point of exhaustion when one of the rescued seamen told him there was still one more person, a woman, aboard the wrecked vessel. I would dispute that intensely, because while yes, he may have taken one man initially in order to have someone to run for other help, it is almost certain that he would have taken the woman second. Unless, potentially, there was some concern that she would not be able to hold on, or that he would not be able to manage her, possibly based on her garments. Who knows? And in any case, with God's help, we will save her, said the captain. Now, it's interesting that he uses we here, and yet he's supposedly doing this by himself. This line, with God's help, we will save her, is generally attributed to this, or generally appears in the stories where he has a dog helping him. Again, the record is fuzzy. With God's help, we will save her, said the captain, and for the 27th time he plunged into the boiling surf to make another successful rescue. Unfortunately, William Jackman did not long survive this eventful day on the coast of Labrador. He died very few years later, and his ashes rest in the quiet cemetery of Belvedere in St. John's, Newfoundland. When we read of Horatius and his swimming of the Tiber, we should be proud to know that a Newfoundland fisherman, performed a far more valorous feat, though as yet no Macaulay has risen to record the deed in immortal verse. Not necessarily true. The initial reading I did at the beginning of the video is a song that is in honor of Captain Jackman. So, yes. Now, regarding the end of this story, I have heard multiple different versions. The version I am most familiar with is that Captain Jackman successfully rescued all 27 passengers aboard the ship, and then was experiencing hypothermia toward the end, because, and that doesn't surprise me, that water would have been nearly freezing cold, if not below it. Salt water does not freeze easily. Especially when it's mobile and churned up and things like that. But in October, it may have been warm enough that it wasn't freezing. That said, he would still have been suffering from hypothermia by this point. Not necessarily something people understood. But as I've heard the story told directly to me, Captain Jackman swam out to the boat and swam back 27 times and rescued all 27 people, and then, being exhausted, collapsed and died of hypothermia on the beach. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it was 109 years later that I was born in Labrador City, in the hospital that is named for him. And I believe I have an image of that hospital. Yes. Okay. Just one second. I do apologize. This is the first time I've done this particular style of video. And while I don't intend to edit it, I do hope to get a little smoother with my transitions. So this is the Captain William Jackman Memorial Hospital, which was in Labrador City for quite a long time. The hospital, eventually most institutions do unfortunately outlive their intended purpose, or technology moves along, medical science moves along, what have you. Simply put, apologies. Let me get a sip of water. So, with all things, eventually decay and entropy set in. So the hospital did close, if I recall correctly, about 10 or 15 years ago. I may have that date very wrong. I don't know for certain. There is another hospital that has taken up the load. However, to my knowledge, it was not named in his honor again. Unfortunate, but it is what it is. Let me see. So there's the hospital again. Now, I mentioned earlier on that there was no memorial for him. And just to bring on the other story that I found relating to this, this is from about 5 years ago now. The community, if I recall correctly, is Renews. Yes, Renews. And you'll notice the difference in spelling here. But there is a push to have a monument built for him in Renews. I'm not aware if it's been successful or unsuccessful at this point, but Captain William Jackman left, and also he figures in the thumbnail very prominently. This image on the right is actually, and I have a slightly damaged image in my thumbnail compared to the one in the CBC story. I suspect someone did a little bit of photoshopping to remove what might have been damage to the image, the physical photo. But on the right side here, this is a memorial stamp that the Government of Canada produced. If I recall correctly, the set of stamps was called Canadian Heroes, which is inaccurate. Captain Jackman is a wholly Newfoundland hero and should be honored as such. In any case, his third cousin, which is not a direct descendant, but a descendant of his family, is now president of the Heritage Society created in Captain Jackman's name. There are steps. They use the word cement here. What they should use is probably concrete, because in any case, this is the only remnant of the home where Captain Jackman was born in 1837. They call him a storied son. He performed an act of bravery that he did, in fact, earn the Life-Saving Medal of the British Humane Society. Captain Jackman was actually something of a celebrity for what he had done. So what I suspect is that he had, in fact, survived, as the story I read pointed out. And just to find an image of the medal that he would have gotten, I believe it's this one. Yes. Just to show you that. Oops, that's me. Okay. So this is the medal that the British Humane Society would have given Captain Jackman. And, well, this is the reverse. Hac pretium sive servato. Tulit. I'm not a great Latin scholar, so bear with me while I translate that. Here. And I do apologize for the little bit of roughness in my voice. I'm dealing with a little bit of an infection in my throat. That's very minor, but it's very irritating. And I find that the more time I spend speaking or singing, and I do attempt to sing, my voice is not particularly well suited to it, but the singing is not for entertainment, it's actually to exercise my lungs. So the Hac pretium Sive Servato Tulit, I think, or Tulit. And it roughly, Google translates it as "this cost the citizen to save." I am thinking more, just to remove the word Tulit. If you take Hac pretium sive servato, it says this is the cost of saving a citizen. If I take out servato and go back a little more, this cost the citizen, and in Hac pretium it's this price. So I think a fairer translation of this might be the price of servitude paid, or something along that line. In any case, let's go back and have a look at the story of single-handedly rescued 27 people from a schooner that struck in subarctic Labrador waters during an October hurricane. And again, this is another aspect of the story that is occasionally not necessarily wrong, but retold differently. Now people in his hometown are determined to resurrect his feet from obscurity. Mike Chidley is a advocate for the monument. We are part of Canada, and we need to make William Jackman one of Canada's greatest heroes, and I absolutely think he should be considered a great hero, not necessarily only of Canada, but of Newfoundland in particular. He shows the ideal of heroism taken to its extreme, of self-sacrifice in the name of preserving life. And I think he truly should be, as newspaper reports in 1867 pointed out, that he was lauded as a hero for risking his life not once but 27 times, swimming from shore to the foundering sea clipper approximately 200 meters out. I would challenge that assertion as well, or assertion rather. I would say it probably wasn't that far. That said, swimming 10 meters in the frigid North Atlantic is not exactly easy work. And Jackman's great-great-grandson is also mentioned. He saw his work at a glance and proceeded to do it, the Newfoundlander reported. Now, the Newfoundlander would have been a magazine or newspaper of the day. My apologies. Well, no, actually, this would be an example of the medal. Let me see. Oh, there's a bit here. Oh, this is Glenn Jackman. It's incredible to the point of challenging credibility. In some ways, yes. And to give the writers of the time fair due, when someone did something heroic, it was not particularly, or epic in this case, it was not particularly unusual for them to be lionized beyond the scope of what they had done. If it was done today, it would be all over the news, and it was all over the news at the time. And, of course, here's the... the new hospital in Labrador West was opened in 2015, so only 7 years ago. And it does not bear Jackman's name, which I think is unfortunate at the very least. Let's see... While neither the federal nor provincial government has agreed to help pay for a monument in Renews, the group is not giving up. One of our greatest artists, Gerald Squires, did some drawings for us, said Chidley. Squires died in 2015, but Chidley hopes to build on that vision. A lot of our young people are not focused on that part of history anymore. This is one of the unfortunate things about Newfoundland, is that we have a terrible tendency, and I'll just put myself back on screen. Our people, my people, have a very terrible tendency to dismiss or disregard our own history and heritage in favor of some nebulous culture that really couldn't give less of a toss about us, to use a Britishism rather than the very salty Newfoundland language I'd like to use. I do intend to keep this somewhat family friendly. But yeah, the fact that a lot of our Newfoundland history is being lost and forgotten thereby is heartrending in some ways. I know there are stories from the past that my father told me that his father would tell that some of the uncles, now in Newfoundland, uncle is an honorific as much as an actual family title, but some of the stories that uncles would tell have been lost, and that's very unfortunate. I think preserving that is a good idea, to say the least. Now, let's go back to this briefly. I will try to wrap this up shortly. One of the things I like very much is that Jackman was said to be a humble man who put his medal and his scroll from the British Humane Society in a drawer and never spoke of it again. I would say he probably talked about it occasionally. When someone asked about it, I'm sure he wasn't reticent. And it says here he died at 39, 10 years after the rescue. So, quite likely he did not die of hypothermia, as the story I was told had it. It was widely speculated that he never fully recovered from the physical trauma of saving 27 people from the sinking schooner. Having done things that are occasionally considered to be outside the human norm myself, I can tell you that that sort of thing does linger. It does create lingering injuries. I can only imagine how much damage that would do. Now, something does occur to me that I should check. The average lifespan in the 1860s, or the average life expectancy in the 1860s, and let's try Newfoundland just to see if I can specify it a little more. Here. This chart is supposed to be telling me why life expectancy is misleading. In 1900, the life expectancy in the U.S., and I do apologize, I have to use the U.S. Let's see here. Birth, age 20, age 40, age 60. Okay. This is not great useful. But life expectancy then was already in the 60s. So, he did die young. However, for Newfoundlanders in that time, it was slightly young. Newfoundland in that time was not an easy place to live. He would have been born in the family home in Renews, so this is probably the only picture of the house that exists. And Glenn Jackman says, Renew's famous native son deserves a permanent tribute in his hometown. I absolutely agree. And I believe with that, folks, I have come to the end of my video for the day. So I will give you back my face, and before we go, I will treat you to a good long look at this Newfoundland hero. And I will point out that, in my eyes, Captain Jackman remains one of the leading heroes of Newfoundland history. And a very good reason why we should always consider that it is our duty and obligation as men to help others where we can, when we can, as we can. In any case, folks, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're having a good day. I hope you continue to have good days. And rise again until lambs become lions. Goodbye.